This is the Cyber Insurance News and Information Podcast. I'm Martin Hinton, Executive Editor. Every week we talk to the underwriters, brokers, and security leaders shaping the market. All right then. Welcome to the Cyber Insurance News and Information Podcast. I'm the Executive Editor and your host today, Martin Hinton. And joining us today is Chris Skipworth, the CEO of Passpack, which is a zero-knowledge password management platform for corporate credentials, data, all that stuff we know we need to keep safe. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. How's your day been so far?
Well, thank you, Martin. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward very much to having this discussion with you about Passpack, how we help the insurance business and other small businesses manage their credentials and keep safe in this era of ever-increasing cybersecurity attacks and hacks, which is definitely a growing trend, as we've discussed in the past. Absolutely.
It absolutely is. Before we get to the present, one of the things I want to do is jump back with the basic idea and the basic question: how did the simple password become so complicated? Go ahead.
I was going to say, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I mean, that's just one of my favorite sayings I use with my staff, especially my engineering staff, all the time. And I would say, how did the simple password become so complicated? It's just a string of characters, but it's not so much obviously the access and the storage of the simple password. It's really the governance of the password. Who has access? And the other bigger problem is when a password goes rogue, as I say, or gets out in the open market where it really shouldn't be, what damage can that particular password cause to an individual or a business? So there's lots of controls that need to be put around the password to make sure it's governed correctly, especially within a corporate environment, controlled, easily updated, and all those good functions which we come to expect today. And we need to do to keep ourselves safe online. So, yeah.
So stepping back to the 1990s, when I think I'm right to say that's when you came over to America, a decade or two after I moved here from the same country, and the sort of basis of computing and technology wasn't really built around the idea of security. So I wonder whether you might take me back to the sort of, all we talk about now is security and cybersecurity and all these layers, and we've got AI now in the mix, but security wasn't really foundational element. I don't know if that may be overstating it, but take me back to the beginning of where security existed and the password existed in, say, the mid 90s when, I think it's safe to say the internet and the idea of sort of connected commerce around the globe was, how do I say it, coming online.
Yeah, definitely in its infancy back then. Well, in fact, I think I'm just trying to remember the exact date, but the password has been around since the 1970s. I think it was originally developed by IBM in their mainframe environment just to give certain people's access to certain resources. But back in the 1990s, I'm trying to think that far back, to be honest with you, Martin. I was probably better looking and slimmer back then, but as we all know, back in the 1990s, the actual web was coming into being, really. And there were two sides to that. Certainly, security online was nowhere near as advanced as it is today. But also, I think the way we actually ran our lives back in the 1990s was extremely difficult. I don't remember getting into online banking until the middle 2000s, really, when security was becoming more prevalent. I remember actually signing up for various websites, and you'd be lucky if it did ask you for a password. Sometimes it would just take your money off you and grant you access into a particular resource to check that your subscription was valid. So really, back in the 1990s, security was actually very loose. And as I say, we were using the web very differently. We weren't using it to actually communicate the way we're doing today. We weren't doing transactions online like online banking, stockbrokering. The social media epidemic hadn't actually come up at that point. So in many ways, back in 1990 or the 1990s, online life was a lot simpler than it is now. And in some ways, because less was actually online, there was less risk back in the 1990s. And I think that's where part of the problem comes is if you look at how services are grown online, it took a while for the security around those services to grow up alongside the actual requirement of the user to be safe online, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it did. I mean, I think that one of the ideas that sort of presents is if you don't start out with the right foundation, and we see this a lot now with AI, right? We've got these open letters from various AI companies about the idea that we need to, slow down, pause, have more lateral movement and less horizontal movement in the sense of progress. And do you think that that's a reflection of needing to make security, or being concerned about the consequences that maybe you're not imagining, more present? Do you think that the past is informing our present any at all, or is it just more worrying?
I think I think in this day of AI, I think cybersecurity is much more worrying than it ever has been, really, in terms of making sure that your information is kept safe and secure out there. I mean, we also hear a lot about these data brokers online who seem to have access to all our information and sell it quite regularly. So, certainly the world of cybersecurity and the potential for future hacks has certainly got a lot more prevalent out there, I believe, than it was obviously in the 1990s. As the sorry, carry on.
No. I was going to say, but finish your thought.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, certainly with the dark web and all the resources which we have online, the need to actually keep our credentials safe and secure is becoming much more evident these days. And the risk to an individual and especially a business is much more prevalent in the event that they should have a breach or a hack. So
you've used the magic word for today to some degree a couple of times, and that word is credential. As we move on in the conversation, if you could just slow down for a second and what's the way to put it? Double click on what does credential actually represent inside a modern business environment today? What does that mean? I think that a lot of people might be imagining a badge with your photo and your name, if you want to date yourself, and that was it. It didn't scan. It didn't have any electronic features. It required a person to look at and then look at you and see the name or cross-reference that against something in the real world. Obviously, it's gone a long way from that. What do we mean when we say credential now? And then you could sort of, if you want to just naturally take me into credential management, the problem that exists there, and Passpack's role in that.
Absolutely. Well, a credential basically is very simply, as we all know, it's a username and password in its most basic form. Beyond that, there'll be another form of authentication, some form of multi-factor authentication, allowing access into a particular resource. And going on beyond that point, there might be some other information attached around that credential. It could be a bank account. It could be a credit card number. It could be some personal information attached to that particular credential. So really, when we use the term credential, we're not just talking of passwords. We're talking of a bigger picture in terms of identifying information and access information, really. Passpack's role in that, we call it a credential management because it does a lot more than just store passwords and usernames in the cloud. It stores information, notes, and other key information around a particular password or credential, which would help with the running of the business. And just stepping back from that, Passpack is really a cloud-based system. It keeps your data heavily encrypted in the cloud. Only you, as the user, have the keys to access your data in the cloud. Not even Passpack employees can actually see the information stored within the Passpack environment. That's one of the main reasons why it's so secure. It's called a zero knowledge architecture in that sense. And I think you gave a wonderful analogy when we spoke a little bit earlier. It's a bit like a safe deposit box at a bank, where the bank doesn't necessarily know what's actually in the vault, but you have the keys to the front of the vault and have access. The Passpack is a very similar concept. Only you have the keys to your data within the environment. It also provisions the sharing of these credentials to other users in the organization, and it also gives a clear audit trail of who owns what credential when they accessed a particular resource. And most importantly, what happens when a person's role changes within the organization? Do they really need access to all these resources? And especially if a person leaves an organization, you have to make sure that their credentials are revoked and their privileges are actually revoked. It's one of the most common ways a small business is actually breached really out there is the offboarding process. Yeah.
Or like dormant credentials, right? The ones that just linger even.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at a business, and we're actually guilty of it as individuals, you can imagine what it's like for a business first of all, when you first get a password manager, you think, I've only got 10, 15 credentials, which are key to my life. And then you start to build, and then suddenly you've got 100 credentials. Well, in a business, that can spread to thousands of credentials. Some of them old. You don't know who has had access to what in the past, providing a particular security risk to a resource in the business. So yeah, credential sprawl is actually a big issue within an organization, and really tying down. Yeah, sorry, Martin. Yeah.
No. Please. I was just going to say, an example of it, if I'm not mistaken, is Colonial Pipeline was a hack through a dormant credential, and there'll be a note in the show notes to confirm
Yeah,
that.
in fact, actually, another great example is actually United Healthcare. Of course, they had a very significant hack by hackers that got into a particular area of their system and had a password, a fairly weak password on the front of that system, but it didn't have any multi-factor authentication set up on the front of that system. And again, a bit like the insurance business, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, not only did they get into the top end of the system, it went through to their providers, and it caused all sorts of data security issues around medical information. And United Healthcare had to settle up in a very big way after that particular data security breach. Yeah.
So in your sort of journey, was there something specific about this business problem that you found particularly interesting or motivating to come up with this solution, or did you just see it as a business opportunity? Talk to me a little bit about the passion behind it.
It wasn't quite as direct as being a business opportunity, even though I could see a business opportunity. Going back in time, I was involved in other startups which had security elements to them. One particularly was a credit card protection company. So it used to issue a masked credit card number. A subset of that was password management. And I could see how important passwords were for protecting people's financial information. And then as we got more into the world of the password and the credential, we could see, well, this is a real problem for businesses. So a natural progression from that particular business, it was actually into password management. And hence, is how Passpack really came to be as a credential manager, as you call it, really tailor-made for the business environment. So that's really where it came from. Most of my working career, Martin, I've probably evolved into things rather than actually being smart enough to identify something straight off the bat.
Well, you revealed the level of courage that you possess, because that's the case with most people, despite what they might tell you about their well-executed plans. I think is
absolutely, yeah.
One of the things I want to touch more on the credential sprawl problem, but one of the things about Passpack that we touched on and that I thought was kind of interesting is there's a sort of a real burden on small and even medium-sized businesses with regard to the cost of some security. And I'm not saying it isn't worth it, but that's a real friction point for companies when they're looking at their budgets and that sort of thing. And in some respects, this for credential management, password management, and sensitive information access management, Passpack provides, in your opinion, a solution to that reality. So I wonder if you might give me the sales pitch, because I've got small and medium-sized businesses on my mind at the moment.
Absolutely. Well, that's it. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there, really. I mean, a lot of small to medium-sized businesses are big targets for cyber criminals. And just to give you a bit of knowledge around that, really, or a bit of just a bit of background, mainly because small businesses don't have the resources in-house that large ones have to actually manage their IT resources. IT is probably a secondary, or IT security is probably a secondary function within that business. It's a shared role within the business. People don't realize how sensitive it actually really is. So it doesn't really get the focus which it actually really requires in a small business. What we aim to do with Passpack is really empower the small business to get up and running very quickly with a strong cybersecurity solution that allowed them to manage their credentials quickly, onboard people very quickly, know who owns which credentials very quickly, generate the necessary audit trails if required, all at a very cost-effective price point for a small to medium-sized business. Something which we're not talking thousands of dollars for, let's say, a small business. We're talking, below $1,000 for an organization of 10 to 20 people type of touch. So And the other side of that was actually making cybersecurity friendly and easy to use within the organization, making it very simple to get up and running with a good, strong cybersecurity solution.
Yeah.
So that was the fundamental premise of Passpack. Obviously, we can go up to much larger companies if we have to, and we do deal with enterprise scale customers as well as the small to medium sized business. So yeah.
So we've established the resource, and I want to come back to the necessity. So credential sprawl, who has access to what? I think that it's very hard for me, and I've been doing this for a few years now. I think it's very hard for a lot of people who are even smarter than me to comprehend what we can't see. So when you think about a computer network within even a small company, there are an enormous number of doors, if you will, that are controlled. And the simplest one that we've touched on is the logging on to the system, use a password, you get a second factor authentication, and boom, your screen just doesn't have a blank space where you enter a password or whatever it might be. What happens is that these identities, and we keep using the word sprawl, but they almost, in a weird kind of sci-fi way, self-replicate and grow, and the vendors come in and contractors come in and summer interns come in, and there is this amazing churn and growth of them, and they become, in some respects, by their nature as invisible to the naked eye, and also their volume, a bit hard to manage. So how long would it take a company to determine who owns what credentials, and what can they access, and what what they were last used for, like the kinds of questions you would ask for security, which you touched on? Who can go where? The log of it is vital when it comes to, say, a cyber claim, like, who used that credential? When would they use it? How difficult is it in your experience when you're encountering companies to even inventory the number of identities and credentials that they have open?
Well, that's a very good question. And actually, I mean, fundamentally, it's let's go back to credential sprawl, how it really happens within an organization. One way it particularly happens is by adding more systems into a company. Okay, I need an automated system over here. I need a CRM over here. I've got online banking, and people tend to use passwords which are easy to remember around those particular systems. So you're adding more systems, you're adding more credentials. The other thing that happens as a company grows, and hopefully successfully, it adds more people, and then more people require access to these systems. So you have credentials given to more people that require. So more and more credentials are out in the open across time. And to answer your question, if it's a good question to ask any manager of a particular company, CEO of a company, IT manager, if they have such a thing. How long would it take you to actually identify who owns which credentials? How are they using it? And when were the last times those credentials were changed? I would guarantee in a high number of cases, without having a good organizational structure like using a Passpack product, a lot of owners could not answer that question. It would take them a long time, and they probably wouldn't actually know the full answer to that particular question. So that's credential sprawl is a big problem, and identifying the ownership, access, and where these passwords are actually going and how they're actually being used is a big issue. So, yeah.
I mean, in the simplest ways, it's hard to know where you stand without knowing what you possess. I mean,
Absolutely,
it doesn't matter what it is, right? How good is our inventory? Well, what is our inventory? I don't know how many we have, boss. Well, that, like, we don't even know. Like, should we make more? Should we make less? Should we order more? That sort of basic understanding of knowing what exists is the underlying problem. And I guess what I'm curious about is, when you see problems around these emerge, are they, and we know this, right? You touched on this. People use, if you've got 10 systems and you need 10 passwords, you might use 10 variations of the same thing, which makes it easy for you, but it's also then easy for you to have one stolen, and that one then be used to derive iterations of that one that allow them to break into another system with your credential for one part of the box. Is that one potential problem that emerges?
Well, that's definitely one potential problem. And another big issue is, how are those passwords stored? Are people storing them in their browser password manager, which is definitely not secure? Are they putting them in a spreadsheet and emailing to each other? Are they keeping them on sticky notes around the outside of the PC? How are they sharing these passwords, and how are these passwords being updated? And again, if a password's out in the open, you're not sure who has access to that particular password, which for a company can be a particular risk, not only for its own internal resources, but for its clients' resources as well. Yeah.
So you're looking then at a situation where if, one of the things we touched on is offboarding, right? An employee leaves, you've got their literal credential, and then all the access to that credential created for them for the work they were doing. So there are other layers to that credential that are maybe not obvious to the sort of layman. Is that I guess what I'm trying to move toward is the idea that you've got human and non-human identity and credentials. I wonder whether you might touch on that a little bit.
Definitely, that's right. Well, I mean, the offboarding problem is it's a huge problem, especially for companies or for legal companies. A very good example of this, where they bring people in for a very large legal project, give them access to resources. Then when the case is finished, they disband that particular team, but they still have access to company systems, and those credentials are still active when they leave the organization. It's also particularly relevant to development companies if a person leaves to a competitor and they still have access to critical internal systems within the company, which can give away the company trade secrets. And there's been some very famous cases of that, really. The offboarding problem is definitely an area where any cybersecurity enhancement can be made to a business easily, is definitely an area to focus on. When a person leaves, you want to make sure you actually change the credentials very quickly and make sure they don't have access to any particular company resources or systems which could be critical for that business.
Yeah. I mean, it seems so obvious, and no one, I would suspect, would deny the idea that if you have a home and you have a problem with someone who works on your home, and as a function of the work they did in your home, you allowed them to know your alarm code or have a key to the home, that you would, in the wake of ending business relationships with that person, consider changing your alarm code and maybe changing the lock or asking for the key back. But then could they have made a copy of the key? Right? All these conversations seem obvious in the natural world. Those same concerns, and thus the liability for not executing properly with regard to them, exists in the digital space, right?
Absolutely, it does. It's a bit like not changing the lock on your front door. If you think there's a if there's somebody you don't want to have access to your house and you've let the keys out in the past, you really want to make sure that lock is changed on the front door. And again, it's one of the biggest or the most common uses for a solution like Passpack is to actually revoke privileges from a particular user. Either they change role or leave the organization. It can be done by a central administrator very, very quickly to make sure that these people don't have access to what they shouldn't have when they leave an organization. So, yeah.
So if I'm understanding Passback, just before we step into the insurance space for this, the idea is it gives you almost a control room, sort of single point of observation for all the credentials that exist.
Absolutely.
Within.
I mean, typically within a Passback setup, you'd have a central administrator, and all the passwords for the organization would be put in that particular repository. He would then invite his team members, his employees, to join the admin account. And then he would create teams or folders and actually share particular credential resources to the people that need them. And actually, in that one important point, so that only really gives access to the correct people that need access to a particular resource. Not everybody has access to everything. And you can really pinpoint down who has access to what resource. That does one or two things. It actually limits the attack surface area within a business because you only know that a limited number of people have access to certain credentials. And it also gives you the ability to actually audit user activity much more granularly as well within the business. So you can see who accesses what resource and when, basically, in the event of an audit trail being required for some compliance report. So, yeah.
So we're going to come to the cyber insurance element of all this a little later, but one of the things we discussed that I don't think I was maybe as up to speed to as I'd like to admit, I'm going to go with wasn't really thinking about, is that within the insurance business in general, there's a big issue with credentials and access, and it's because of the way the business is designed, which obviously is there's advantages to. Talk to me about the insurance problem that's particularly complicated, the access problem.
Well, actually, the insurance business is actually very interesting, and it's not the only business that has this problem. I could pull out another few examples, but really, fundamentally, the insurance business has grown over time. It's a very old industry, and in many cases, a lot of these insurance companies are using old legacy systems, which really didn't have good cybersecurity provisions made when these systems are actually employed. The other problem with the cybersecurity business is you have a lot of third-party access going on. You rely a lot on partners and people to access systems. And every time you issue a credential to a particular partner, you actually potentially have a point of threat or point of attack, because that credential is now out there and you can't really tell where it's going and how it's being used. You had shared operational accounts. You have complex access to chains and supply chains, insurance sales chains, I should say. And it's just a very big, large attack surface area when you get into all the various elements of the insurance ecosystem, and how many partners and people need access to various systems and how you control that, basically. And I think we touched on this last time, Martin, but it's interesting with the insurance business. They are demanding very high standards of cybersecurity from their clients, but on the other hand, are they really implementing the systems they require internally within their own particular environment? So,
what you're describing is broadly referred to outside of this specific scenario is supply chain risk, right? That sort of third party risk.
Absolutely, and that's the supply chain would be the other. I mean, they're two very different businesses, but they share a common issue where they have lots of legacy systems or lots of systems interconnected. The further downstream you go in the supply chain business, the more people need access to various resources. If you have an attack in one area of the supply chain, it can ripple through. It can ripple down to a lot more other clients, really causing big problems in terms of data loss for end customers and clients. And the same applies to the insurance business as well. You only need one or two breaches upstream, and this whole thing can ripple downstream and affect a lot of people in both the insurance business and the supply chain business. And it was effectively what I gave the example earlier of the United Healthcare breach. That's basically what happened. It affected a lot of downstream partners. That particular breach did.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's another important factor which we haven't really spoke on for the small business, but if there is a breach in a small business, not only is there the loss of business and loss of internal resource, but there's also the loss of reputation. And that can be a huge issue for a small business. I always say everything is relative in the business world. Yes, if you're a big corporation, you're going to get fined heavily, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're a small business, it doesn't take much of a fine to make a big dent in your operational capability of that business, really. So again, taking some very simple, straightforward procedures to protect your cybersecurity is a key step.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things they say, I think I mentioned to you, I spent a significant amount of time doing military history documentaries earlier in my career. And one of the things that involved was spending a lot of time in active military situations, from bases to other places. And one of the things you always talk to them about, they always talk about, is access control. Like, the security of any physical place is controlled by the entry points and the fence, and how well is the fence monitored, and is it repaired, is the guard paying attention. And I remember one of the things, I was in South Korea at the DMZ, and the guards on the North Korean side and the South Korean side have a very performative sort of interaction where they're very rigid and they're dressed immaculately, and they're beautiful, almost not quite dress uniforms, but not fatigues, if you will, or BDUs, and they all wear sunglasses. And I remember asking, why are they wearing sunglasses? So you can't tell if they're not paying attention, was the basic answer, right? So the sunglasses conceal the eyes that are like, oh my God, I got to get home. I'm so tired. I've been here for 12 hours and the sun is baking me. But you create a mask, if you will, that reveals, or it limits the ability of an observer to determine whether or not you're actually being secure or paying attention, I suppose, in the case of a security guard. And I again, that the appearance is a bit like, the house with that looks harder to break into. Well, I'm going to go to the next one, right? Why change all that? So
absolutely,
it's just an interesting idea that, again, I feel like sometimes I beat this because I talk about this a lot, but I see a significant problem with the security that exists in the cyberspace. But the kinds of threats we're facing are the same threats that affected us prior to this reality of our economy, right? Human greed, your selfishness, the desire to steal things for your own benefit. Like, these are not new things. And the practices of protecting us are similar. The mindset is similar. The dilemma in the digital space is the speed and frequency and reach and the number of identities you need to create for systems to operate properly and allow people to move through them to do their work. And now into that space has come AI. So what's AI changed in your space? I mean, it feels like we've been saying that for a while now, even though the reality of, particularly the commercially available LLMs and stuff like that is only a couple of years old, or a little more than a couple of years now. So what do you see with AI? Because phishing isn't new, theft isn't new, impersonation isn't new. Certainly social engineering isn't new. A lot of people have said to me, AI is going to be very helpful for the defender and the attacker, but the attacker was doing pretty well without AI. So, it's
Absolutely,
kind of a concern.
Yeah. Well, I think what AI has done fundamentally is actually make it a lot easier for the attacker and make it a lot easier to do attacks at scale and at volume. Also make the attacks much more realistic, i.e., AI makes it a lot easier to actually fake a document or to fake an identity of a person online, to make you think that, hey, it really is Chris Skipworth on the other end of this, right? I would take his authority, or I will follow his actions, right? So AI has actually made it much easier to impersonate a person. You also have a very advanced AI attacks, which are like basically faking the video and faking the voice, and especially in voice recognition systems. AI is particularly strong at mimicking a person's voice and gaining access, or making, you can make a voice sound like Chris Skipworth if you actually wanted to actually gain access to particular resources. So I think what AI has really done is actually made it easier. It's really made it a lot easier for the cyber criminals to actually go at a much broader base of attack targets, and also the attacks have become more sophisticated, or at least more realistic. As you said earlier, phishing has been around forever. It's one of the oldest forms of attack online. But every week, there's lots of phishing emails that go out, and we spoke last time about how a lot of phishing victims are much more of the elderly out there from a personal standpoint, because they trust much more what comes in their inbox or appears on their phone in a form of a text. AI has changed the business dramatically in that sense, absolutely. And I think AI will continue to get smarter and continue to get more lifelike, in terms of mimicking these attacks. And the other thing AI is actually really particularly good at is actually spotting vulnerabilities within an organization as well. And you've heard some of this from the big AI companies. It can analyze an organization and say, oh, this organization has a security weakness here because it's using this particular security solution at that particular point in their security ecosystem. So yeah, there's various ways that AI, and of course AI learns and it improves on itself over time as well. And so it's really it's a golden tool for cyber attackers, unfortunately, which means, us on the other side have to be much more aware of the type of attacks that can come in, and be much more up on our cybersecurity and what we do to prevent it.
I don't think we discussed this, but there's this new initiative out of the U.S. government about having companies take on some of the role of almost like a bug bounty kind of incentive, executive order out of the White House. I'm not that interested in that. What I'm kind of interested in is the idea that I've heard all along, that attributing blame is often quite difficult. Like, figuring out exactly who the attacker was is sometimes a bit of a challenge. And obviously, if you're a criminal, the ability to conceal who you are is significant. It creates a significant advantage, right? Because no one knows who to go after. I just wonder whether you might touch on sort of, whether or not there's the ability within AI or Does AI create a bit bigger cloud or a more obscure view in that sense that you can, I think we've all seen the movie where someone tries to trace a log on and the map shows the VPN jumping from, Kuala Lumpur to Central Africa to Moscow. I feel like I'm reliving like half of the scenes in a Mission Impossible movie, but this sort of thing does happen, right? Like that's mimicking reality. And I'm wondering whether AI is going to make it harder to assign responsibility when things go wrong.
Oh, absolutely. I think AI does make it very hard to assign responsibility to people when things do go wrong, or to entities when things go wrong as well. Especially if the AI has been mimicking an identity of a particular corporation or person. I mean, it's and often, I think we touched on this last time as well, that when the damage is done, it's normally done very, very quickly. Money's wired somewhere and it's gone within the target account within minutes of it hitting the account, right? And it's very hard to trace, because the cyber criminals that know exactly what they're doing, when they're inside an organization, they get somebody to authorize a particular transaction. The money is gone, it's out of the target account, and the deal is done. And there's very little to track alongside of that. Absolutely,
Yeah, I think I like to mention this. A lot of our audience will know this already, but one of the things that you'll often get is money transferred into a bank account. Once it's in that bank account, it's very quickly moved from that criminal bank account that you didn't realize was a criminal bank account to somewhere else. Once that happens, it's impossible to get back. And
absolutely,
in fact, in the incident response people I've spoken to, I think I can think of a single time that money was recovered in a sort of business email compromise is often the common way this might happen, where an invoice is made to look like it's coming from a certain company, but it's actually changed and the bank information is different. People don't check, they wire the money, and poof, it disappears. The only time they've recovered it is because the bad guys didn't remove it from the target bank account very quickly, and that made it possible to recover. So it's I mean, there are banking apps. I think it's Zelle that's, there's one where it's like, if you send money with this, treat it like cash. It's like, well, why am I using a fancy app then?
Absolutely,
like, what's the point
that's
of
right.
that? Like, if this is just handing money to strangers, why are you even here? Like, what is the point?
Exactly. And of course, I meant, sorry, Martin, but I was going to say, things like money transfer services, Cash App and Zelle, I mean, they're can be absolute targets for cyber criminals. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, very easy. Funny. And because depending on where you are, they're not regulated the same way as banks. So your recourse as a consumer is often limited, as opposed to, say, if you were going into a Citibank, then you also have to get someone to help you on their customer service that isn't an AI. So that's another barrier.
Exactly. But
all of that comes to sort of the idea that one of the situations we look at is, and it drives us crazy, when videos don't play right away, or you click something and the page doesn't load right away. But that in this context of reducing theft, reducing the cost of this crime, friction is maybe not all bad. And I guess, when you think about sort of two-factor authentication, aside from there being two keys that you're using, or two things that are unlocking separate locked items, there's a slower process, right? So if I'm transferring money and I have to transfer money from one bank to another, so I need to log on, I have to have my log on second factor authenticated. Then when I go to do the transfer, I need to get a code generated from an app and that sort of thing. All of that creates steps where I can think, wait a second, am I sending $5,000 to the right person? Should I not be sending this money? Now, I don't do a ton of this. I think if you're doing 50 of these a day, you fall into a routine and you're being pressed to be efficient and that sort of thing. I wonder whether you just might talk a little bit about the concept of friction within this in this space and the value it can create that is very hard to count, because what's the common phrase? It's counterfactual, right? It's hard to count money you don't lose to a cybercrime and point to it as an upside.
Right, exactly. Well, it's always been a big trade-off between what I call convenience. The easier a solution is to actually use, the less secure it tends to be, right? And that actually not only applies to the actual solution, it also applies to the policies surrounding that particular solution as well. For instance, I mean, wiring money is a great example. If you're relying on one person to wire lots of money to various different places, well, that person's definitely going to be a target for for AI potentially and a cyber attack. So you have to look at the procedures around, or the internal procedures around, well, what else is required around that particular person in terms to make sure they're authorizing money above a particular amount to make sure it's going to the correct. What sign-offs are actually involved, which again applies friction to the whole process, but it also helps keep you secure as well. I mean, typically within the work environment, it was one of the fundamental things about Passpack was making it easy to use. If a solution is easy to use and secure and straightforward, people are much more likely to use it than actually a complicated solution, which takes time to learn, time to understand, and just makes their life basically more complicated. People are much more concerned about getting the next widget out the door, making the next sales call, whatever it takes to actually run the business and grow the business, really. So there's definitely is a trade-off between security and actual convenience. But and in there's definitely a balance, right? So, you can't have things so convenient they're actually wide open to attack. You don't want to make things so security heavy that they never get used by people within an organization. So hopefully that answers your question to some degree.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, I just think it's one of those elements of this that you increasingly hear C-suite executives talk about, and people in the cybersecurity side. You want employees who think before they click, right?
Absolutely.
And we've been conditioned to just click, right? I mean, I think the last time I checked I don't remember which corporation it was, so I won't name check them, but it was some new term of service for some sort of, platform. And to read it for the normal person would have taken like 21 hours, right? Never mind the fact that they're written by lawyers. And I am not naive enough to think lawyers are always in a rush to help you understand the legalese within their documents. So I think that there is this sort of, barrier to friction that is in some ways, the last 20 plus years, basically since the iTunes store, I think might be the fair sort of starting point to in the professional space. Obviously as consumers, we're like one click to buy and all that sort of thing, and your credit card's saved in your browser and you don't have to enter your information and your address autofills. All of these little things are they increase sales. And I think that everything that a criminal knows about behavioral psychology and how to organize a website or a store is there for them to act upon. So it's just an interesting idea. You did answer it. I want to just pivot now to the cyber insurance reality of this. One of the things we know is that the market is under a lot of pressure. Flat, adjusting. Depending on who you talk to and the level of optimism, I think it might be fair to say a lot of companies in the last few years joined it without comprehending the difficulty underwriting the risk or even assessing risk in any real way. So what you're seeing is this move away from one-time checklists at renewal to constant monitoring and the ability to confirm in a more dynamic or comprehensive way that MFA is properly implemented and that sort of thing. Should insurers be applying essentially the same cybersecurity expectations internally that they are being asked for of the insured? You sort of touched on this before, and I wonder whether or not you have more to say about sort of the idea that this ability to say, oh, well, we've got Passpack, we deserve to pay X% less, or we have all these things in place, we use all these tools to help manage our credentials. They should gain us greater trust. We are lower risk as a result. We should have a lower premium as a result.
Right. Well, actually, Passpack does work with several large insurance companies to help mitigate the risk with their end customers, and we're actually looking to work with more. Going back to your earlier question, I think most definitely it's a bit sort of, I think it's personally unfair that a particular company asks an end customer to actually install these particular cybersecurity provisions in their organization without them doing it themselves further upstream. So the answer is yes to your question. Cybersecurity companies definitely need to actually implement the actual cybersecurity policies which they're putting onto their particular clients. In many cases, I fully understand the challenges in that with a large insurance company, which is dealing with many different sales agents, brokers, and many different facets of its business. It's a lot easier said than done. But I think certainly within the cyber insurance space, it's definitely improving. If you look how banks have changed over the years with their cybersecurity. I think insurance companies are taking similar measures internally to actually improve their own internal security. But it does take time, absolutely, to actually get those security measures in place.
Well, tell me a little more to the degree you can about some of those insurance company relationships you have now. How did they come about? Did you go? You mentioned you're looking for more business. Did you go to them and say, "Hey, listen, we can help you find more insurable risk"? Right? How did that all come to be? And tell me more about those relationships.
Well, basically, actually, the relationship started, but really with insurance people actually approaching us. In all honesty, saying, "Okay, well, we actually are very interested in solutions which help us mitigate risk with our end clients, basically." So we were approached by several insurance companies to have these conversations. And it's been quite interesting on some levels. There's obviously various parts of that whole ecosystem that need to be managed within the insurance sales cycle. Where does Passback actually fit in that whole sales cycle with their insurance brokers and so on? It's fairly early days for us. We've actually only really been actively doing this program for about the last 6 months. So we are, as we move forward, we also learn with our insurance partners as well, basically.
Well, you
Yeah.
go
Sorry,
ahead.
but I
Pardon
said,
me.
but the whole deal is to actually make sure that the end user is actually safe and secure and is just doing some basic fundamental actions, which can really save a whole lot of pain in the event of a breach or in the event of a cybersecurity attack on a particular business. Absolutely.
Yeah. Is the value proposition that this is it as simple as, hey, here's something that'll help make you more secure, and if you use it, then you're a better risk for an insurer. Is it that simple, or
It's that simple. In many cases, especially for the small to medium sized business, it definitely is that simple. Absolutely. Yeah.
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 When you think about where we are now with, MFA, and again, there are so many ways that it works. I almost, it's an acronym that can mean more than several things, right? So you can do MFA through an SMS text, or, all sorts of other things. Where do you see the future of this going? With identity security and, passwords and passkeys and all, we've got biometric now, depending on the device and the access point to get into your iPhone. Tell me about what you see, at the horizon, and to the degree any of us can predict the future, a viable reality going forward.
Well, I think actually, in all honesty, if you look at the security landscape, it's definitely evolving. You have some other, you have solutions like Passkeys out there. You have various ways of authenticating access into a particular resource. So really what you're having to handle these days as a modern business is actually various ways of accessing particular information. You just don't really have one solution that fits all, especially if you're a larger company. So you're having to actually manage various solutions. And coming down the horizon, I think you're probably going to see some of these solutions blended more together across time. I presented to a small group of business owners in Arizona a few months back, and the issue of passkeys came up. Well, passkeys are very good for some things, but they're not good for everything. They're not good if you need to share them. They rely on a technology to actually authenticate the person into the particular resource. What happens when the passkey fails or the authentication device goes down? Well, password is the backup. So you've got to have various contingency plans in place around the various solutions out there. And it's definitely a case of one shoe does not fit all currently. And I think that's going to continue. And going back into AI, that only actually complicates the issue in terms of some of these more advanced type of attacks.
I sort of set you up here because one of the realities is tons of companies and organizations don't even use the most basic MFA, never mind what might be cutting edge.
Absolutely.
Do you think that one of the messages here for companies that are looking to be more secure and reduce their cyber risk and perhaps be able to go to their broker and say, hey, listen, look, we want to somehow document that we've got MFA across, every login, every credential, pardon me. Do you think one of the underlying messages is that don't wait for what's coming? You can use what's now, and you can do a lot to make yourself more secure.
Absolutely. Well, actually, with MFA, it's a fundamental part of any security posture. I mean, I would advise everybody to set up MFA where possible. And what MFA does, it does say, okay, well, the person logging in also has the MFA code, so it's the real person logging in, basically, or an authorized person logging in. What it doesn't do is supply the ownership of that particular credential. You can't tell who owns it via an MFA login. Again, I mean, the MFA code could well leave with a credential when a person is offboarded, so it doesn't really solve that particular problem. So again, MFA is part of the whole security landscape. But as a fundamental security action for any business, yes, set up MFA on the accounts which actually support MFA. It's a fundamental good security measure which you can take this afternoon or tomorrow. It's along with actually making strong passwords. I mean, so many people use weak passwords every year. It always surprises me, and I know this is probably a bit more on the consumer side, but the most common password is password 1234. So don't use easy to actually remember, easy to replicate passwords. Again, just going back into the AI threat, AI can do a much better job in cracking weak passwords. It's got the tools at its disposal. In fact, some people are actually foolish enough to actually ask AI to generate a strong password. And of course, what that does is it enters into the large language model, and and then somebody only has to ask a question again, and it gets a similar type of password.
There you go. I think there might be people here who are thinking, "Oh, I'm so bad with my passwords," and I would just say that the password for the security system at the Louvre was Louvre 123, and
That is my favorite. I wrote a blog about that. That's one of my favorite hacks. And actually, and even the Louvre were warned about that. You should change that password. And and again, it's a prime example. Louvre 123, and no MFA on the account either. So
yeah, I mean, we sort of jumped over it. The fact that I was reading a report that I haven't finished yet today about Internet of Things security, and that means all the things around us, the router in your home, for example, that they often have passwords that are default passwords, and very rarely do you reset them and change them on your own because there's no screen, it's not obvious, and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
And all of these points of access are, in some respects, identities that allow people to get into your secure space, your network,
absolutely,
your company
yeah.
files.
I mean, the most common example of that is the wireless router, of course, right? We all have wireless routers, and typically the password to get into the router is admin or admin 123, and nobody ever changes that. Well, I'll say nobody. Security conscious people do, but not many people do.
No, I mean, I think it sort of brings us back to the friction. If you get a new home Wi-Fi network or a new router from your cable provider, your net provider, you're typically getting it because you don't have one that's working properly. You're ripping it out of the box. You're plugging it in as fast as you can, and you're moving on with your day. You're not thinking about security because I think of the first time I learned about the idea that routers could do way more than just route your internet traffic, right? Like to and from that they possess, if you will, the most classic of backdoors into what you perceive as a secure environment. And I think it's one of those weird things that is a sort of vestige of back when we were hobbling this internet together and, before my time maybe, but it's just one of those things that sort of lingered around that creates real vulnerability that is not obvious to people. That's not something you would think, oh, you know what, there's another thing that's like my laptop. No, these are all points of access that you need to control.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I mean, heaven forbid if you have all your passwords stored in your browser password manager, which again, going back to this convenience thing, is actually a very convenient way to live. It just pops up when you're actually on. But if somebody gains access through the front door of your PC, you're wide open, and they've got bank accounts, they've got credit card numbers, they've got addresses. I know, and browser password managers are one thing we preach. Please do not use your browser password manager if you're serious about security. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're on that point you made earlier about the balance between convenience and friction, and if it works, people will use it. Martin's cat 123 is
Yeah, and I forget what the number is exactly, but I mean, Google or Chrome actually controls about 90% of the browser business, or maybe slightly less, but it's a very high percentage of the browser business. Of course, it's a huge attack vector for any cyber criminal. Go after the browser. It's got so much good information stored about personal individuals and businesses, right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
be very careful what you store in the browser is the motto of that
That's
story.
been the subject of a past podcast of ours. So it is, and again, it's a good for a non-technical person, which I think a lot of people are, given how technical everything we touch is, even when we're not in a technical sort of profession. The layer of vulnerability that's created by the convenience we enjoy is very real. I as we move to the close, I just wanted to come back to sort of the human side of this, right? Tools, tricks. The technology only works if the person who gets access to it uses it the way it's intended. So I wonder that there's a constant tension between security and convenience, and we've touched on this a little bit. And I just want to talk a little more about how you might approach this from a leadership point of view, or you've touched on some stories you might tell, or lessons you might impart. But what about this is an example I think I mentioned you when we spoke initially. The idea that if you're doing a cybersecurity seminar and it's 50 people in a conference room and they're sitting there and there's slides and maybe a little Q&A or a scenario, how important it is for, maybe a C-suite executive of one flavor or another to be in every single one of those 10 sessions. If you've got, 500 employees and you've got 10 C-suite executives, one's in each meeting, to impart the importance of this, to show that no one is immune from this. I think that we touched on the idea that when Archie Norman, who was the chairman of Marks and Spencer's, testified before Parliament about their hack a couple of years ago, he talked about sort of in a almost aha kind of way that they have 50,000 employees, and whether it's a store clerk in Manchester in Northern England or an IT worker in India, there is vulnerability equal from all those points. And this idea that there is the need to create a more sort of, if you will, system-wide or employee-wide understanding of why it matters that you use the right tools. So what about the human side of this, sort of from a security point of view?
Well, that's a great point. I mean, I always say that training is very important for an organization, just to make people aware of the risks. You don't have to go overboard on the training, but really push home that really it's, I think you touched on this earlier, or maybe in a previous conversation. If there is a cyber breach and the company actually has resources removed, it could affect your paycheck, right? It could affect your livelihood. It could affect the actual future of the business, the reputation of the business. So in training around the importance of cybersecurity is very, very key. But in order for security to be used within an organization, it has to be simple to use. And you touched on, the various levels of people's expertise in cybersecurity. One thing we're very conscious of at Passpack is we want to make Passpack easy to use, not only for the power IT manager, but for the general user that doesn't really have much cybersecurity experience or knowledge. But it's not really going to interrupt their day if they have to use Passpack to log into a particular resource, especially when they actually understand that it has a real impact on the company if there is a cybersecurity issue. If the company gets breached, or some information from the company, or it affects the company's clients. So the importance of using the tool. So partly education and partly making tools easy to use. I mean, you're always going to get some people, I've done it this way for 10 years and it hasn't happened to me yet, but it always can happen. In fact, We've had numerous incidences of people, I was using the same password for 10 years and never had an issue. And then suddenly you have a breach, right? So there's various facets to that question. Martin, but I'm a big proponent on training. It doesn't have to be heavy training. It doesn't have to scare people into using a product. It has to make them aware, and then supplying the tools which are easy to use so you can actually implement your cybersecurity policy within an organization simply and effectively. And it doesn't interfere with the employee's life within an organization. So, yeah.
So we've been talking about an hour, and I'm sure we didn't get to everything. I got a couple wrap-up questions, but before we come to that, I just wanted to see whether there's anything we didn't get to that you'd like to talk about, or whether there's anything we did talk about that you'd like to say any more about.
Now, the only thing I'd like to talk about is that this actual business is constantly changing. Absolutely. I mean, the AI threats will only increase across time. The importance to take some very simple, straightforward measures to protect yourself and your business are very straightforward. Yeah, it's an interesting business. And as much as people said many years, I think Bill Gates famously stood up at one particular convention and said, "Oh, the password will be dead inside a year." But he was talking about biometrics and other authentication methods, and that was probably about 20 years ago now he said that. So, credentials and passwords are definitely here to stay. It is a fact of modern life, and there's no need to be shy of them. They are, you can take some very simple, straightforward cybersecurity steps to really improve your cybersecurity posture
Yeah, I
out
mean,
there. So,
listen, we still carry keys. I think that idea that if you're going to put what you value into any kind of space, whether it's a real space or a digital space, whether it's your personal stuff or whether it's professional, if you will, IP, you want to make sure it's secure. And the idea that
absolutely.
the idea that
Yeah,
you care about it is enough motivation, right? Like this stuff
absolutely.
matters,
Yeah,
and I think that
absolutely.
having
Yeah.
that mindset and knowing that doesn't perfection is not possible, but that attitude needs to be dialed up a little. So I want to pivot to some sort of, we touched on small and mid-sized businesses. They don't have a CISO, they don't have a huge cybersecurity budget. The relatively small IT team that is also doing cybersecurity, which is a whole other conversation. If the CEO or owner of this company comes in on Monday morning and would like to address their credential and identity risk, what are three things that they should do or ask their IT manager, or maybe they've got an outside provider? What are the top three questions you would want to know the
Well,
answer
I
to?
mean, we touched on one earlier. I mean, definitely set up multi-factor authentication on all your critical systems where applicable. Um, it's a very good idea to have a solution like Passpack and put all your credentials in one place, and most importantly, know who owns what credentials. The other important part, which we didn't touch on too much, but it was actually the importance of obviously generating strong passwords, but also rotating login credentials regularly. Don't leave the same credential out there for years and years, because it's going to get out, and you are going to experience a breach further on down the line if you're not too careful. So it's basically multi-factor authentication. Make sure you have all the passwords secured in an encrypted area and shared securely to the target employees. Change them regularly, and know who owns what, basically, which you can do by generating a report, or just really know who owns access to what. And if you have any doubts, change the credentials on your critical systems, and then make sure you know who owns what credential when it comes to logging into particular resources.
And so finally, I mean, it seems to me, we started out not particularly secure in the sense of, the early days back in, say, the 80s or 90s, the password, and it was really a point of access for a log on for a computer within a, college environment where the internet was first accessible to people. And we've evolved and we sort of patched security onto the, if you will, the world's tech stack. Do you see a reality where now, particularly with AI, businesses are viewing the importance of cybersecurity as a functional element of business operation, and it's not just something that can be sort of secondary, that you have to protect your digital space like you would your physical space? Do you see that evolution ongoing?
Definitely, I think cybersecurity is a basic requirement, and you see that in the insurance businesses, the way that they're actually demanding. And you actually hit on a very good point earlier. I think it's very difficult for the insurance business to really gauge the risk around cyber security. I mean, there's obviously significant risk there, but the history of the business is so short that it's really hard to get some very solid numbers around that. But yeah, it's definitely evolving. It's definitely going to become more critical as time goes on. It's very important for a business to take simple steps to actually improve its cybersecurity posture. AI will only accelerate. I mean, you look where we were 3 or 4 years ago and look at where AI is now and the potential threats out there. So, yeah, this landscape will definitely continue to evolve. And we, as the good guys on this side of the fence, have to make sure that we supply the tools to make it very difficult for the cyber criminals out there. So, yeah, it's
Well, Chris, I think that's a great spot to end on. Like you said, there's going to be much more to say. I don't think this will be the last time you're on the podcast. So again, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Martin. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you. Always enjoyed talking. Thank you very much.
Chris Skipworth, CEO of Passpack. Again, thanks very much for your time. Everyone else, thank you so very much for watching. I'm Martin Hinton, the executive editor of Cyber Insurance News and Information. Enjoy the rest of your day.